Guys, Miss Cager here for English 2. This recording is to go along with your 2.04 lesson in your English 2 course. And today we're going to be talking about how authors mold their themes and central ideas and how they use different literary devices to do so. So we're going to be analyzing how authors use language, including things like extended metaphors, sensory imagery, and illusion to convey their ideas and their themes throughout their work. So first, before we really dig into looking at some text, let's review some of the terms that we're going to be discussing as they apply and as they're found in a text. So first of all, we have imagery. And this is one of the easiest terms to remember because imagery is language that creates a mental picture or an image for readers. It can do so through things like figurative language or sensory language. So an example of figurative language, this sentence says, "Winter descended on us like a creeping wolf in the night." Okay, that paints a very vivid picture for us. Sensory language, this is language that appeals to our 5 senses, says, "I listened to the sharp scream of the bird in the coal black night." So as I said, imagery comes from the word image, which means a picture. So as you read, ask yourself whether the language is helping to create a picture in your mind. If it is, then that's imagery. So what is the imagery in this sentence? The soot-stained chimney belched out clouds of smoke that was the color of dirty dishwater and that smelled like burnt plastic. There's a whole lot going on in this sentence, so let's break it down a little bit. First of all, we have soot-stained chimney. That tells us what it looks like. The chimney belched out clouds of smoke. That gives us a sound to reference. It was the color of dirty dishwasher, and it smelled like burnt plastic. Very rich sensory language there, telling us how it looked, how it would have sounded, what it smelled like. Very rich, creates a very vivid picture for us. So that's imagery. Next, we have illusion. And illusion is one of these things that tends to give us a little bit of trouble. So an allusion is just a brief reference to a significant literary, historical, religious, or cultural person, place, event, or statement, and it's used to make an idea more easily understood. Okay, it gives us something to compare to. It's a reference to something else. Authors use allusions both in literature and in informational text, and allusions establish a shared reference point or language for both the writer and the reader. This gives the readers a deeper understanding of the text and the author's purpose. For example, Jerome, a young doctor in the community, treats patients for as many as 14 hours a day. He takes every case seriously and seems to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. So this is a little bit more subtle allusion. And here the writer alludes to the literary myth of Atlas. Atlas was a Greek god who literally carried the weight of the world on his shoulders as a punishment from Zeus, who was the king of the gods. So by using this phrase that he carries the weight of the world on his shoulders, that's an allusion to a well-known literary or mythological story, which is the story of Atlas. Here's another one. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. This is from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. And this underlined portion, drinking from the cup, is where Dr. King is alluding to a biblical text in the Bible where He says, "You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of devils. You cannot be partakers of the Lord's table and the table of devils." So that allusion to drinking from the cup comes from the King James Version of the Bible, and that's what Dr. King is referencing here. So let's think about this for a minute. Allusions reflect a particular culture because they suggest that readers will understand what the author is referring to. Sometimes you will not understand allusions. Sometimes you won't even recognize them. That's okay. But what I do encourage you to do is take a little bit of time to look up that reference because you'll gain a deeper understanding of the text and of the author's purpose if you can look up the reference and understand what it is that the author is referring to. So how do allusions impact the meaning of a text and its effect on readers? Allusions give readers a deeper understanding of the text and the author's purpose by providing a shared reference point. Typically, the author is referring to something that is a broad, well-known example in that particular culture. So it gives the writer and the reader kind of a shared experience by referring to an older text or an older example that both sides are familiar with. Let's talk about metaphors. Metaphor is a figurative language that makes a direct comparison between two unlike things. Now, metaphors do this without using the words like or as. For example, when the race started, the black stallion was a bullet flying down the track. Okay? We know that that stallion is not a literal bullet flying down the track. They're comparing the stallion to the speed of a bullet. So metaphors are not intended to be interpreted literally. The black stallion is not actually a bullet. Authors use metaphors to depict or reinforce an idea for readers. Instead of saying the black stallion was really fast, the author compares his speed to a flying bullet to illustrate just how quickly he was running. So remember, similes and metaphors are similar literary devices. They both make comparisons between two dissimilar things. The difference here, it's really simple. The only difference is that a simile uses the words like or as to compare the two things, and a metaphor just makes a direct comparison. So like we saw on the last slide, a metaphor will just say, a black stallion is a speeding bullet, and a simile would say the black stallion is as fast as a speeding bullet, or the black stallion is like a speeding bullet. So if we see the word like or as being used to compare those things, it's a simile. If those words are not there, it's a metaphor. Sometimes a metaphor is a single statement that illustrates something small, as in the sentence about the black stallion. Other times, an entire poem could be a metaphor. For example, a poet might write many lines or stanzas comparing anger to a roaring ocean, and this is called an extended metaphor. So what kind of comparison does a metaphor make? A metaphor makes a direct comparison between two unlike things. It does not use the term like or as in the comparison. Going back to allusion and imagery for a minute. Writers use many techniques to communicate ideas and emotions. Extended metaphors can enrich meaning. Allusions build connections through time, and sensory language creates experiences through sensation and feel. So let's take a minute now. Think about the terms we've just reviewed, and we're going to look at an excerpt from a short story in which a young woman shares some memories of her childhood. So let's look at this excerpt. It says, "For my mother, the state park up past Grand Forks was paradise, her own personal Garden of Eden. With the mountains rising in the distance, we'd walk with her along the twisting and turning paths, through the sounds of the cicadas chirping out of sight and the wind rustling the leaves overhead, until we reached the river. And there we'd sit, and there Mom would start to talk. 'I'm your mother, and you are my children,' she'd say. 'But for the creatures in these woods, the deer and the rabbits and the birds and the trees, this river is their mother, and they are her children. She feeds them. She keeps them clean. At night the soft sound of her waters lapping at the banks is a nursery rhyme that helps them to sleep. In the morning, the crashing from the falls below is a wake-up call that helps them rise. She never, ever abandons them, and no matter where they may go, she will always be here for them, just like I'll always be here for you.' And as she talked, we would listen to the water whisper and dance around the stones, and watch as the riverbed glistened as if the light itself were diamonds embedded in the sweet, cool earth." So let's take a minute to just look at these underlined texts and really analyze the illusion and imagery. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to just go back and look at these underlined pieces before we move forward in our discussion. So we have first, right off the bat, the author using an illusion. She says the Garden of Eden is her own personal Garden of Eden. And the Garden of Eden is a reference to a biblical place where everything is perfect. The author in this passage describes the park as this paradise and then alludes to the Garden of Eden. And this helps us understand just how special the park is to the author's mother on an emotional level and a spiritual level. So this allusion develops this reverent, appreciative, almost like a sacred kind of tone. Imagery is all over this passage. So I've under or highlighted some of the examples here. She does a really good job of painting this picture for us, with the mountains rising in the distance, twisting and turning paths, cicadas chirping, rustling the leaves, the soft sound of her waters lapping at the banks, the crashing from the falls. The water whispers and dances around the stones, and the riverbed glistened as if the light itself were diamonds embedded in the sweet, cool earth. So lots of sensory language here, really giving us a good picture of what things look like, what they sound like. Um, Kind of really helps build the mood, helps with the tone of the piece. It's very gives us a feel of nature and very natural and beautiful and peaceful. Sensory details like the soft sound of her waters lapping develop a comforting, peaceful tone. The cicadas chirping and the water whispering and dancing around the stones create this playful and joyous mood. So the author uses this and other imagery to show us the beauty of this park environment and to help us see it as the mother and the children see it. So through the character's perspective, we can better understand just how meaningful this park is to all of them. So let's take a look now at what an extended metaphor might look like. Authors use extended metaphors to create a comparison and expand on it throughout a text to add layers of meaning and to help readers make deeper connections to the text. So we're looking at the same text here, but let's look at this middle portion. And she says, "I'm your mother and you are my children," she'd say. "But for the creatures in these woods, the deer and the rabbits and the birds in the trees, this river is their mother, and they are her children. She feeds them. She keeps them clean. At night, the soft sound of her waters lapping at the banks is a nursery rhyme that helps them to sleep. In the morning, the crashing from the falls below is a wake-up call that helps them rise. She never ever abandons them, and no matter where they may go, she will always be here for them, just like I'll always be here for you." So that middle section is where the metaphor begins to develop as the author explains that her mother took them to the state park to go to the river, where she tells them of the role of the river as the mother figure in the natural world. She says the river feeds the animals, the river keeps them clean, the sound of the river's waters is a nursery rhyme. All of these ideas extend this metaphor. They build this deeper meaning by showing the multiple ways that the river acts as a mother. So finally, the very last part, the mother compares her devotion to her children to the river's permanence by saying, she will always be here for them, just like I will always be here for you. So what we have here is this long metaphor, this extended metaphor of the mother comparing herself and what she does to care for her children with the river and how the river acts as a mother to all of nature around her. So we have this long extended metaphor, this extended comparison of the mother to the children and the river to nature around her. So after looking at all of those pieces, what is the big idea or the theme that the author is communicating in this text? Take a couple of seconds to think about that. What is the author trying to say here? I think the biggest idea, or the biggest theme that we can find here is that the author's trying to illustrate that the bonds between mothers and their children are eternal. It's a sacred bond. It lasts forever. It can never go away. Now, we could pull some other more minor themes out of that, but I think this is the really big one. I think this is the main point that the author's trying to drive home. So if we take this idea of the bond between a mother and her children being this strong eternal bond, let's extend that a little bit. How does the author develop this idea? How is this theme of the eternal bond between mother and child developed throughout this passage? Well, the first paragraph develops the idea that the author's mother spent a good deal of time with her children and shared with them those things that are special to her. The second paragraph then describes the connections the mother feels with the river and the natural world, and how these same connections exist between the mother and her children. So how does that extended metaphor right in the middle of the passage, where she's comparing the river to a mother, how does that help develop the theme? Remember, we said the theme is that the bond between a mother and her children is eternal. So how does using that extended metaphor in the middle of the passage, how does that help develop that theme? Pretty simply, the extended metaphor compares the river, which gives life and the support to the surrounding wildlife to a mother. So just as the way that river will always be there in nature, the author's mother will always be there for her children. So you can see how we can first identify these different devices. We can look for a figurative language and allusions and metaphors. We can look for all those things and we can identify them. And then we can look at the theme of the piece and say, what is it that the author is trying to communicate? And then we take it a step further and we say, okay, how does the author communicate that idea? What happens in the passage to communicate that theme? And then with this passage, we took it even a step further and we zeroed in on a specific item being this extended metaphor. And we can really look at how that metaphor helps to develop the theme of this eternal bond between a mother and children. So as we move through our course, as we get deeper into literature throughout our course, these are the kind of things that I want you to practice doing. I want you to practice identifying these things. Look for allusions, look for metaphors, look for sensory language. First, identify those things that you see within the text. And then ask yourself, what's the big idea that the author is trying to communicate in this text? What is the theme? And then once you have that down, put all of those pieces together and really appreciate how everything within the text is intentional and works together to develop that idea, to communicate that theme that the author wants us to understand. All right, guys, that's all I've got for you for this 204 lesson. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you soon. Bye.